Imagine walking through a forest and looking up to see a human figure towering 9 feet above the ground. Massive shoulders, hands the size of dinner plates, eyes staring down from a height that shouldn't be possible. The year is 300 million years ago. The air shimmers with moisture, and everything around you feels wrong. The atmosphere itself presses against your skin with unusual density. Each breath fills your lungs with something richer, more potent than the air you know. Oxygen saturates every cell, at levels reaching 60% of the atmosphere, nearly triple what you breathe right now. In this moment, as you listen to these words, but here's the truth that science must tell you. Humans never grew 9 feet tall. Homo sapiens appeared only 300,000 years ago, long after oxygen levels had fallen back to modern percentages. We missed that oxygen-rich world by nearly 300 million years. No human ancestor walked through those prehistoric forests. No primate existed. Not even the earliest mammals had yet emerged from their reptilian ancestors. Yet, what did grow to impossible sizes? In that ancient atmosphere reveals something far more extraordinary than any tale of giant humans. Because oxygen didn't just change the size of living things. It fundamentally transformed what was physically possible for life on Earth. It rewrote the rules and the remnants of that transformation. The genetic signatures, the evolutionary adaptations, the metabolic machinery exist inside your body right now, in every cell, in every breath you take. The oxygen concentration in your lungs at this precise moment, 20.95% of every breath, represents the invisible prison that constrains your size, your strength, your maximum physical potential. You cannot grow 9 feet tall. Your bones would snap under the weight. Your heart would fail trying to pump blood to that distant head. Your lungs couldn't extract enough oxygen to fuel that massive frame. Physics and biology form an absolute barrier. But 300 million years ago, when Earth had 35% oxygen, when every breath carried 67% more of that precious molecule, the barriers shifted. The impossible became inevitable. Creatures exploded in size across the planet. Insects grew to the dimensions of cats. Amphibians swelled to the mass of crocodiles. Forests stretched toward the sky with species that no longer exist. The entire planet transformed into a world of giants. A world that vanished almost without trace, leaving us to puzzle over the fossils and wonder what laws of nature had temporarily been suspended. The question that will guide us through the next hours together is this: how does oxygen control the maximum size of living things? Why does that one molecule, one simple pairing of atoms, determine whether you stand 5 feet or 9 feet tall? Whether insects remain thumbnail-sized or grow to the length of your arm? And what does the answer reveal about the body you inhabit, the DNA you carry, and the invisible forces that have shaped every living creature for billions of years? To understand why giants vanished, we need to travel back 300 million years, to a world you wouldn't recognize, where the air itself was different, and life was forced to adapt to an atmosphere that would kill you within minutes. Picture stepping through a portal into the Carboniferous period. The first thing that strikes you isn't the strange landscape. It's the air. You gasp. Your lungs flood with oxygen so concentrated it creates an almost intoxicating rush. Lightheadedness washes over you. Your heart races, struggling to adjust to blood suddenly oversaturated with oxygen molecules. Within minutes, your airways would begin to burn from oxidative stress. Within hours, your lung tissue would start to sustain damage. Oxygen, the molecule that gives you life, becomes toxic at high concentrations. Yet this is the atmosphere that dominated Earth for tens of millions of years. The landscape before you stretches in every direction with alien geometry. Forests tower 3 stories high, but these aren't trees as you know them. No oaks, no pines, no flowering plants of any kind. Instead, giant club mosses called lepidodendron rise like organic columns, 30 meters tall, their bark covered in diamond-shaped patterns resembling reptile scales. Massive horsetails cluster near water sources. Tree ferns spread architectural fronds that filter pale green light down to the perpetually damp forest floor. The sound of wind through these strange plants creates whispers and rattles unlike any modern forest. The humidity suffocates. Rainfall exceeds anything in contemporary rainforests. Vast swamps stretch between the forest zones, their dark waters reflecting the alien canopy above. This moisture combines with the high oxygen to create an atmosphere of almost liquid density. You would feel it pressing against your skin with every movement. 20% higher atmospheric pressure than the world, you know. Breathing becomes an act of drinking the air rather than simply inhaling it. This transformation took 50 million years to develop. In the Devonian period, 400 million years ago, oxygen levels hovered around 15%. Then came the revolution. The first true forests appeared. Plants developed lignin, the tough structural molecule that allows trees to grow tall and thick. But here's the critical detail that Dr. Robert Berner of Yale University discovered. Through his geocarbsulf model, published in 2001, early decomposer organisms hadn't yet evolved the enzymes to break down lignin efficiently. Dead plants accumulated. They piled up in vast quantities. They sank into swamps where low oxygen prevented decay. And as they were buried, as they transformed into the coal seams we mine today, they locked away carbon and released oxygen in tremendous quantities. The oxygen percentage climbed. 15% became 20%. 20 became 25. 25 reached 30. And finally, at the peak of the Carboniferous, atmospheric oxygen saturated at 35% of all air, 167% of modern levels. Every breath contained almost twice the oxygen molecules that currently fill your lungs. This wasn't a brief spike. This wasn't a momentary aberration. For 60 million years, longer than the entire age of dinosaurs, Earth maintained this oxygen-rich atmosphere. And during those 60 million years, in this suffocating, oxygen-saturated world, something impossible began to happen. The first creatures to exploit this abundance would become the largest arthropods ever to walk on land, and their fossilized remains would baffle scientists for over a century. The fossil sits in a museum case in France, and visitors often assume it's been mislabeled. A millipede, surely, but the placard must be wrong about the size. Yet the measurement stands verified by decades of scientific scrutiny. Arthropleura, 2.6 meters long, the length of a small car, as wide as a tire when curled defensively, the largest arthropod ever to walk on land. And it was an herbivorous millipede that munched on prehistoric ferns. First discovered in Montceau-les mines, France in 1854, the fossilized trackways and partial body segments stunned paleontologists. Nothing alive today approaches this size among terrestrial arthropods. The largest modern millipede, the African giant black millipede, reaches a maximum of 38 centimeters. Arthropleura exceeded it by nearly 7 times. The creature's segments stretched wide enough that small mammals of later eras could have walked through its legs without touching its belly. But Arthropleura wasn't alone in its gigantism. Flying through the Carboniferous skies, dragonflies called Meganeura hunted smaller insects with 75-centimeter wingspans. Picture that for a moment. A dragonfly with wings stretching wider than your laptop screen. Wider than a large pizza. These aerial predators dominated their niche so completely that no insect has since evolved to match their size. Modern dragonflies max out at roughly 19 centimeters wingspan. Meganeura was nearly 4 times larger. The explanation lies in the fundamental constraint of insect respiratory design. Insects don't have lungs. They don't have blood that carries oxygen like yours does. Instead, they breathe through spiracles, tiny holes along their body segments that connect to a branching network of tubes called trachea. Air diffuses passively through these tubes. No active pumping, no circulation system. Pure diffusion following concentration gradients from high to low. And here's where physics becomes the prison. Diffusion only works efficiently across short distances, according to Fick's law, described by Dr. C. Yoko Klock in a 2007 Journal of Experimental Biology study. Oxygen can diffuse effectively through tracheal tubes for roughly 1 centimeter. In modern atmospheric oxygen levels, beyond that distance, the concentration gradient becomes too shallow. Oxygen can't reach the deep tissues fast enough to sustain metabolism. The insect suffocates from the inside despite being surrounded by air. This is why modern insects stay small. A typical beetle spans less than 2 centimeters. Most insects measure in millimeters. Their respiratory system absolutely constrains their maximum body size. You cannot build a large insect with 21% oxygen. The physics simply don't permit it. But increase oxygen concentration to 35%, and suddenly the mathematics transform. The concentration gradient steepens. Oxygen diffuses deeper into tissue. That 1 centimeter effective distance expands to nearly 2 centimeters. Body mass can increase dramatically while still maintaining adequate oxygen delivery to all cells. The constraint releases, the ceiling lifts, and insects explode in size, growing to dimensions that seem impossible until you understand the atmospheric chemistry that made them inevitable. Yet if oxygen could transform passive diffusers like insects into cat-sized giants, what about creatures with lungs, with active blood circulation, with spines and sophisticated cardiovascular systems? What happened to them? Evolution handed vertebrates a gift that insects never received, and it's pumping in your chest right now. Your heart. That fist-sized muscle that beats roughly 100,000 times per day, contracting and relaxing in tireless rhythm, represents a fundamentally different solution to the oxygen distribution problem. While insects rely on passive diffusion through static tubes, you possess an active circulation system that aggressively delivers oxygen to every cell in your body, regardless of distance from the surface. The architecture is elegant. Air enters your lungs, flows through branching bronchi into progressively smaller passages, and finally reaches the alveoli. These microscopic air sacs, roughly 480 million of them in your lungs, provide approximately 70 square meters of surface area for gas exchange. That's roughly the floor space of a small apartment, all of it dedicated to moving oxygen from air into your bloodstream. Hemoglobin molecules in your red blood cells bind oxygen with remarkable efficiency, carrying 1.3 milliliters of oxygen per gram of hemoglobin according to standard physiological measurements. Your heart then pumps this oxygen-rich blood through 100,000 kilometers of blood vessels. That's enough to circle Earth's equator 2.5 times. Arteries branch into arterioles. Arterioles split into capillaries so narrow that red blood cells must squeeze through single file. These capillaries permeate every tissue, bringing oxygen to within micrometers of every living cell. The diffusion distance from capillary to cell interior remains tiny, easily bridged by the concentration gradient. This system completely bypasses the constraint that limits insect size. Diffusion still matters, but only across microscopic distances. Your circulation delivers oxygen deep into your body, to your toes, your fingers, the center of your thigh muscles, with no reliance on atmospheric diffusion through tubes. The oxygen concentration of the atmosphere becomes less critical. You can function in 15% oxygen at high altitude. You thrive in 21% at sea level. And you could theoretically breathe 35% oxygen without dramatic size increases. Dr. Graham Scott of McMaster University, in studies published in 2011 on the evolution of oxygen transport systems, demonstrated that vertebrate circulation efficiency removes atmospheric oxygen as the primary constraint on body size. Other factors become limiting: skeletal strength, metabolic rate, heat dissipation, cardiovascular pumping capacity, but not oxygen diffusion through static tubes. That prison was left behind when the first fish evolved gills with active water flow, later adapted into lungs with active breathing. This is why you don't see vertebrate gigantism matching the proportional size increase of Carboniferous insects. A modern elephant doesn't weigh 7 times more than its ancestors from low oxygen periods. Vertebrate size remained relatively stable across oxygen fluctuations, because vertebrates weren't constrained by passive diffusion in the first place. The insects exploded in size during high oxygen, because they were escaping their fundamental respiratory limitation. Vertebrates were already free, so if lungs and circulation protect vertebrates from oxygen's size limits, if your sophisticated cardiovascular system can deliver oxygen efficiently, regardless of atmospheric concentration, why aren't you 9 feet tall? Why does the average human stand around 175 centimeters instead of 270? What invisible barrier prevents you from matching the height of the tallest trees? In these Carboniferous forests, stand up for a moment, or imagine standing, and consider your height. If you're a man, you likely measure somewhere around 175 centimeters tall. If you're a woman, probably around 160 centimeters. These represent global averages for modern Homo sapiens. But why these specific numbers? Why not double? Why not half? What determines the precise height your body reached? When your growth plates finally fused in your late teens or early 20s. The tallest verified human in medical history was Robert Wadlow of Illinois. Born in 1918, he grew continuously throughout his short life due to a pituitary tumor that flooded his body with growth hormone. By his death at age 22 in 1940, Wadlow measured 270 centimeters, 8 feet 11 inches. He towered over everyone. Photographs show him standing next to his father, who was himself 180 centimeters tall. And the difference appears almost digitally manipulated. Young Robert's head reached heights where most people's hands couldn't touch. But Robert Wadlow's life tells us something critical about human height limits. His growth hormone levels ran approximately 10 times normal. His pituitary gland produced the molecular signal for grow taller relentlessly, without the normal feedback inhibition that stops growth. Yet even with this biochemical anomaly, even with his body's every cell receiving constant instructions to expand, he reached only 270 centimeters before his system began to fail. He required leg braces to walk. His circulation struggled. His extremities showed poor healing. An infected blister from his brace led to his death. Your body could theoretically produce the hormones needed for 9-foot height. The biochemistry exists. The signaling pathways function. Nothing about human molecular biology absolutely prevents that growth. Yet it doesn't happen. Even individuals with the most extreme growth hormone disorders rarely exceed 150 centimeters. And those who do suffer tremendously. Their joints ache, their hearts strain, their bones develop stress fractures despite being larger and thicker than normal. This suggests that human height, your height, is optimized rather than maximized. Evolution didn't push humans to the absolute ceiling of possible size. Instead, it settled on a height range that balanced numerous competing factors: mobility, caloric efficiency, skeletal integrity, cardiovascular capacity, brain oxygenation, heat dissipation, childbirth compatibility for women, and perhaps most importantly, metabolic sustainability given available food resources. Dr. Daniel Lieberman of Harvard University, whose research on human skeletal biomechanics has revolutionized anthropology, points out that even our prehistoric ancestors matched modern heights quite closely. Homo heidelbergensis, living 600,000 years ago, averaged between 175 and 180 centimeters, the same as modern populations. Homo erectus before them stood around 165 centimeters. Humans haven't grown dramatically taller over evolutionary time, because we've been near optimal height for our ecological niche for hundreds of thousands of years. But here's what makes this fascinating. The limiting factor for your height isn't oxygen availability. It isn't lung capacity. It isn't even growth hormone production, necessarily. The answer lies in something Galileo discovered in 1638. Something that applies equally to humans, to dinosaurs, to insects, and to buildings. A fundamental law of physics that makes giants inherently unstable, and explains why you'll never reach 9 feet tall. In 1638, Italian scientist Galileo Galilei examined the problem of why large animals have proportionally thicker bones than small animals. A mouse has delicate, thin leg bones. An elephant has massive columns. But the elephant is more than just a scaled-up mouse. Its bones are proportionally thicker, not just absolutely larger. Why? Galileo discovered the answer, and in doing so, revealed one of the fundamental constraints on body size across all of biology. The principle is deceptively simple. When you double the height of an object, its cross-sectional area increases by the square of that factor. 2 times 2 equals 4. The object's area increases 4-fold. But, and here's the critical asymmetry, its volume increases by the cube of that factor. 2 times 2 times 2 equals 8. The object's volume increases 8-fold. And since weight depends on volume, the object becomes 8 times heavier despite its structural elements, becoming only 4 times stronger. Apply this to your body. Imagine a hypothetical twin of yourself, identical in every way, except exactly twice your height. This giant twin would be twice as tall. Their bones would have 4 times the cross-sectional area, providing 4 times the strength. But their body would have 8 times the volume, 8 times the mass, 8 times the weight pressing down on those bones. The ratio of strength to weight would be cut in half. What was once adequate support becomes marginal. Now imagine tripling your height. Your strength increases 9-fold. Your weight increases 27-fold. The ratio degrades even further. By the time you reached 170 centimeters, like Robert Wadlow, your bones must support loads approaching their mechanical failure threshold. Wadlow's femur, the strongest bone in the human body, was thicker than a normal femur, but not proportionally thick enough to easily support his weight. Standard engineering calculations show that human femurs can support approximately 30 times body weight before fracturing. At Wadlow's size, every step placed tremendous stress on bones operating near their limits. This explains why he needed leg braces. Why he died from an infected blister that developed underneath those braces. His circulation to his extremities was compromised by the sheer distance blood had to travel, and the enormous pressure required to pump it against gravity to his brain. His heart, which had increased in size but not proportionally, struggled to maintain adequate blood pressure. The square-cube law was slowly crushing him. Dinosaurs faced this same challenge, and solved it through evolutionary innovations. Sauropods developed pneumatic bones, hollow spaces filled with air sacs extending from their respiratory system. The sauropodid vertebrate displayed in museums shows massive bones that were 40% hollow. This reduced weight while maintaining structural strength. But even dinosaurs hit limits. The largest land animals ever, the titanosaurs, reached approximately 70 to 100 tons. Beyond that, even with hollow bones, pillar-like legs, and continuous growth throughout life, The square cube law imposed an absolute ceiling. You possess none of these adaptations. Your bones are solid. Your frame is optimized for 70 to 90 kilograms of body mass. Push beyond that, as Wadlow did, and your body begins to fail. But some creatures found ways around this law, and they walked among your ancestors. Fast forward to 190 million years from the Carboniferous forests. The oxygen level has fallen back to modern concentrations, hovering around 21%. The giant insects have long since vanished. The strange club moss forests have been replaced by grasslands, true forests of flowering plants, and ecosystems that would look somewhat familiar to your eyes. The time is roughly 20,000 years ago, the height of the last ice age, and walking across a frozen landscape in what is now Siberia, a creature moves that would dwarf any land animal alive today. The woolly mammoth, standing for meters at the shoulder. Some Columbian mammoth specimens reached for 0.3 meters. These elephantine giants possessed curved tusks that extended for meters in length. Individual tusks weighed 90 kilograms. The entire animal could reach 6,000 kilograms. 6 metric tons of bone, muscle, and fat wrapped in thick brown fur. Each strand of that fur, precisely 9 hairs per square millimeter according to microscopic analysis, provided insulation that allowed survival in temperatures that would kill modern African elephants within hours. And mammoths weren't alone in their gigantism. Across the Pleistocene landscape, from 2 million years ago until roughly 10,000 years ago, megafauna dominated every continent. In South America, the giant ground sloth Megatherium stood 6 meters tall when rearing on its hind legs to reach tree branches. Its claws extended 30 centimeters. Its body mass approached 4,000 kilograms. In North America, the short-faced bear Arctodus stood 3.5 meters tall on hind legs and could run at speeds exceeding 70 kilometers per hour despite weighing nearly a ton. Australia hosted the massive Diprotodon, a wombat-like marsupial the size of a hippopotamus at 2,800 kilograms. Eurasia supported the woolly rhinoceros, the cave bear, the Irish elk with antlers spanning 3.5 meters. Even islands had giants. Mediterranean islands hosted dwarf elephants alongside giant dormouse. Evolution seemed to be experimenting with body size in every direction simultaneously. And here's what makes this relevant to our oxygen story. These animals achieved their tremendous sizes while breathing the same 21% oxygen you breathe right now. The atmospheric composition was essentially identical to today. Yet they vastly exceeded modern animal sizes. African elephants, the largest modern land animals, max out around 6 tons for exceptional males. Most average 3 to 4 tons. They're smaller than Columbian mammoths, despite having the same oxygen availability. Your ancestors hunted these giants. Cave paintings in France and Spain show Homo sapiens confronting mammoths, documenting kills, celebrating successful hunts. Early humans stood around 165 to 175 centimeters tall according to skeletal remains. They weighed perhaps 65 to 80 kilograms. They were dwarfed by the megafauna sharing their landscape. Yet somehow, these small primates with large brains developed the cooperation. and technology to bring down animals 30 times their mass. Dr. Felicia Smith of the University of New Mexico, in a comprehensive 2018 science publication, documented that Pleistocene megafauna averaged 50% larger body size than modern equivalents. The giants thrived in the same oxygen levels you breathe today. So why did they grow so large, while humans stayed small? And why did they vanish? Carl Bergman noticed something peculiar in 1847. A German biologist studying animal distributions across different climates. He recognized a pattern that now bears his name. Bergman's rule states that within a species or closely related species, individuals in colder climates tend to be larger than individuals in warmer regions. Modern polar bears outweigh modern grizzly bears. Arctic wolves exceed the size of desert wolves. The largest deer species, moose, inhabit the coldest regions, while the smallest deer, pudu, live in tropical South America. The explanation emerges from fundamental physics. Heat production depends on an organism's volume, its total mass of metabolically active tissue. Heat loss depends on surface area, the skin exposed to the environment. And here's where geometry becomes destiny. As body size increases, volume grows faster than surface area. That same square cube law that limits structural strength actually advantages large animals in cold environments. A larger body has proportionally less surface area per unit of mass. It retains heat more efficiently. Picture two spheres, one small, one large, both starting at the same internal temperature and exposed to freezing air. The small sphere has high surface area relative to its volume. Heat radiates away quickly through that proportionally large surface. The sphere cools rapidly. The large sphere, with its lower surface-to-volume ratio, loses heat more slowly. Its internal temperature remains elevated longer in a cold environment. This difference determines survival. Large bodies are more thermally efficient. Mammoths exemplified this principle. Their thick brown fur, denser than any modern sheep at 9 hairs per square millimeter, provided the first layer of insulation. Beneath the fur, a fat layer 10 centimeters thick surrounded their entire body. This subcutaneous fat served as both energy storage and thermal insulation, maintaining core temperature even when external temperatures dropped to -40 Celsius. And their massive body size, 6,000 kilograms of metabolically active tissue, generated tremendous heat that leaked away only slowly through their relatively small surface area. Dr. Adrian Lister of the Natural History Museum in London, the world's leading mammoth evolution researcher, has demonstrated that mammoths evolved from smaller, warm climate ancestors as they adapted to ice age conditions over hundreds of thousands of years. Natural selection favored larger individuals generation after generation. The selective pressure was simple. Smaller mammoths struggled to maintain body temperature. They burned through fat reserves quickly during harsh winters. Many died. Larger mammoths, with better heat retention, survived more frequently. They reproduced more successfully. Their genes spread through the population. Body size increased. This same process occurred across dozens of species. The Pleistocene ice ages created strong selective pressure for large size in any species. Living in cold regions, It wasn't oxygen availability driving the gigantism. It was temperature, or more precisely, the thermodynamic advantage of low surface-to-volume ratios in environments where heat conservation determined fitness. Modern elephants living in Africa and tropical Asia face the opposite problem. They need to dissipate heat rather than retain it. Their large ears, heavily vascularized and waved constantly, serve as radiators to shed excess heat. They're smaller than mammoths partly because being too large in a hot climate creates overheating problems. But there's something even more surprising about human size. Something hidden in your DNA, revealed only recently, in 2008. Russian archaeologists working in the Altai Mountains of Siberia discovered something unusual in Denisova Cave. A finger bone, small, fragmentary, unimpressive to the untrained eye. But when researchers extracted DNA from that tiny bone fragment and sent it to Dr. Svante Pipibo's laboratory at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, the results shocked the anthropological world. This wasn't Homo sapiens. This wasn't Homo neanderthalensis. This was something else. A previously unknown human species that would come to be called Denisovans. The 2010 publication in Science revealed that Denisovans were a distinct human lineage that split from our ancestors roughly 800,000 years ago. They interbred occasionally with modern humans, leaving genetic traces in modern populations. Between 4 and 6% of the genome of indigenous Melanesians and Aboriginal Australians comes from Denisovan ancestors. Smaller percentages appear in Asian populations. And here's what makes this relevant to our size discussion. The fragmentary skeletal evidence suggests Denisovans were larger than modern humans. That finger bone, precisely measured and compared to modern human hand bones, came from an individual whose finger was approximately 20% larger than the modern human average. The molar teeth discovered in the same cave, massive compared to Homo sapiens or Neanderthal molars, suggest robust jaws and possibly larger overall body size. Extrapolating from these fragments requires caution, but multiple anthropologists have suggested that Denisovans may have stood 180 to 200 centimeters tall on average, perhaps more, larger and more robustly built than contemporary modern humans. This size advantage likely emerged from adaptation to cold climates, and possibly to hunting large game. Denisovans inhabited Siberia during harsh Ice Age conditions. Bergman's rule would predict selection for larger body size. And here's where your DNA enters the story. One of the genes modern humans inherited from Denisovans is called EPAS1. This gene regulates red blood cell production in response to low oxygen conditions. The kind of low oxygen you'd experience at high altitude where air pressure decreases. And each breath contains fewer oxygen molecules to the Denisovan version of EPAS1, now found in 87% of Tibetan populations, but only 9% of lowland Han Chinese, provides a dramatic advantage for living above 4,000 meters elevation. Dr. Rasmus Nielsen of UC Berkeley, in a landmark 2014 Nature study, demonstrated that this represents the fastest example of human evolution ever documented. Within roughly 3,000 years, The Denisovan EPAS-1 variant swept to near fixation in Tibetan populations because it provided such a powerful survival advantage in low oxygen environments. Your blood, if you carry this variant, responds differently to altitude. You maintain lower hemoglobin levels, which counterintuitively improves oxygen delivery by reducing blood viscosity. You avoid altitude sickness more readily. You can function at elevations where lowland people would collapse. This genetic gift from a vanished human species, inherited through ancient interbreeding, affects your body's relationship with oxygen right now, and the genes they passed to you might explain something you've never noticed about your own body's capabilities. Take a deep breath right now. Hold it. Feel your lungs expand. That breath contains approximately 500 milliliters of air, of which 21%, roughly 105 milliliters, is oxygen. Those oxygen molecules diffuse across your alveolar membranes into your bloodstream, where they bind to hemoglobin in your red blood cells. Each hemoglobin molecule can carry for oxygen molecules. Each red blood cell contains approximately 270 million hemoglobin molecules. Your body contains roughly 25 trillion red blood cells. The oxygen transport capacity of your blood at this moment is staggering, yet precisely calibrated to your body's needs at sea level. Now imagine climbing to 4,500 meters elevation, the average height of the Tibetan Plateau. At that altitude, atmospheric pressure drops to roughly 60% of sea level pressure. Each breath still contains 21% oxygen, but the total number of molecules per breath decreases by 40%. Your body receives only 60 milliliters of oxygen per breath instead of 105. The deficit triggers immediate responses. Your breathing rate increases. Your heart beats faster. Your bone marrow ramps up red blood cell production to increase oxygen carrying capacity. Most lowland people arriving at this elevation experience acute mountain sickness within hours, headaches, nausea, fatigue, confusion. The body cannot maintain adequate oxygen delivery to the brain and other vital organs. Even after weeks of acclimatization, lowlanders never function as efficiently as they did at sea level. Athletic performance drops by 30 to 40%. Pregnancy becomes dangerous. Infant mortality increases. The oxygen deficit imposes a constant physiological burden. But Tibetan populations, who have lived at these elevations for at least 3,000 years, function normally. They show none of the chronic mountain sickness that affects lowlanders, who stay too long at altitude. They maintain surprisingly low hemoglobin levels, typically 13 to 14 grams per deciliter compared to 16 to 18. In acclimatized lowlanders, this seems counterintuitive. Lower hemoglobin should mean less oxygen carrying capacity. Yet Tibetans outperform everyone at altitude. The key is blood viscosity. When you produce excess red blood cells in response to low oxygen, your blood becomes thicker, more resistant to flow. Your heart must work harder to pump it. Capillary flow slows. Paradoxically, extremely high hemoglobin levels can actually impair oxygen delivery because the blood moves too slowly through small vessels. The Denisovan EPAS-1 variant prevents this maladaptive response. It maintains moderate hemoglobin levels while somehow enhancing oxygen delivery through other mechanisms, possibly increased capillary density or improved hemoglobin-oxygen affinity. The result: optimal performance in an environment that cripples most humans. This matters because it reveals how oxygen availability has shaped human evolution in ways beyond simple size. Your body's response to oxygen, coded in genes inherited from multiple ancestral populations, including extinct species like Denisovans, determines your athletic capacity, your altitude tolerance, your metabolic efficiency. Elite endurance athletes, particularly those from high-altitude populations, often possess genetic variants affecting oxygen transport. The Kenyan and Ethiopian runners who dominate distance races, many of them grew up at 2,000 to 3,000 meters elevation, developing cardiovascular and muscular adaptations that provide advantages even at sea level. But to understand the full story of oxygen and size, we need to return to that ancient world, where the air itself was a drug, and breathing came with unexpected consequences. Lightning strikes a dead tree in the Carboniferous forest. In the world, with 21% atmospheric oxygen, the tree might smolder if it's dry. Most likely, moisture prevents ignition entirely. The fire fails to start. But in the Carboniferous atmosphere, with 35% oxygen, even damp wood ignites. The flames don't spread slowly. They explode through the forest with terrifying speed and intensity. Within minutes, entire square kilometers are engulfed. The oxygen-rich atmosphere supports combustion so efficiently that fires burn faster, hotter, and more completely than anything in modern experience. Dr. Andrew Scott of Royal Holloway University, a paleobotanist specializing in ancient fire ecology, has spent decades studying charcoal layers in Carboniferous fossil beds. His findings paint a picture of a world perpetually burning. Charcoal appears in virtually every sedimentary deposit from this period. Black horizons of carbonized plant material stretch across continents. Analysis of these charcoal layers reveals something remarkable. They contain charcoal from plants that would be considered too wet to burn in modern conditions. Fresh green wood, living moss, even partially submerged vegetation shows evidence of fire damage. The mathematics of combustion explain why. Fire requires three elements: fuel, heat, and oxygen. Remove any one element and combustion stops. The oxygen concentration of the atmosphere directly affects the ease of ignition and the intensity of burning. Laboratory experiments have established that spontaneous combustion of organic material becomes increasingly likely above 25% atmospheric oxygen. At 30%, even damp materials burn readily. At 35%, the Carboniferous peak, the entire landscape becomes explosively flammable. This created a paradox for life in that era. The high oxygen levels that enabled giant insects and lush plant growth simultaneously created catastrophic fire risk. Forests would grow, accumulate biomass, reach peak density, and then burn completely. The cycle repeated endlessly. Paleobotanists estimate that wildfire return intervals, the time between successive fires in any given location, averaged only decades rather than centuries. Some regions may have experienced fire every few years. The landscape existed in constant flux between growth and destruction, between green abundance and blackened ash fields. The fossil record preserves this violent cycle. Sediment cores show alternating layers, organic-rich deposits indicating forest growth, then charcoal layers indicating complete burns, then new organic deposits as vegetation reclaimed the scorched earth. This pattern repeats dozens of times in single geological formations. Each layer tells a story of forest establishment, maturation, and fiery annihilation. The Carboniferous world was beautiful and terrifying simultaneously. A paradise of gigantic life that could transform into an inferno with a single lightning strike. Animals living in this environment faced constant danger. Modern wildfires move at speeds of 5 to 15 kilometers per hour in grasslands, faster in forests, with crown fires leaping from treetop to treetop. But Carboniferous fires, fueled by superabundant oxygen, likely spread even faster. Escape required either incredible speed or the ability to shelter underground or underwater. Many of the giant arthropods, creatures like Arthropleura that could not move quickly despite their size, probably died in massive numbers during fire events. Fossil assemblages sometimes show dozens of specimens concentrated in small areas, possibly animals fleeing fires and becoming trapped in flood channels, or mud flows triggered by the burns. Yet life persisted, adapted, thrived. Some plants evolved thick bark resistant to fire damage. Others developed rapid growth strategies, reaching reproductive maturity quickly before the next inevitable burn. Still others adopted underground survival mechanisms, root systems and rhizomes that could survive surface fires and resprout when conditions stabilized. The evolutionary pressure was immense, but so was the evolutionary opportunity. High oxygen meant explosive growth rates. Any organism that could survive the fire cycles gained access to enormous energy resources. The charcoal itself played a crucial role in the carbon cycle. When plants burned in normal oxygen conditions, much of their carbon oxidizes completely to carbon dioxide and returns to the atmosphere. But in oxygen-rich conditions, combustion is so efficient that charcoal forms in greater quantities, and charcoal is remarkably resistant to decomposition. It accumulates in soils, gets buried in sediments, locks carbon away from the atmosphere for millions of years. Ironically, the fires enabled by high oxygen helped reduce atmospheric oxygen by converting organic material into inert charcoal that couldn't be reoxidized by decomposers. This fire-dominated world shaped every aspect of Carboniferous ecology. Animals evolved in landscapes where destruction was routine, where survival meant constant vigilance, where the air that gave them life could turn against them at any moment. Living in this world of giants and fire required adaptations you can barely imagine, and some creatures developed the strangest solutions. Your lungs right now are performing a task with approximately 35% efficiency. When you inhale, fresh air flows into your respiratory tree, mixing with the stale air that remained from your previous breath. This mixing is unavoidable. Your lungs are essentially dead-end sacs. Air flows in, stops at the alveoli, then flows back out the same way it came. During the pause between inhalation and exhalation, oxygen extraction occurs. But roughly 65% of the oxygen in that breath leaves your body unused when you exhale. The design is functional, adequate for mammalian needs, but far from optimal. Now consider a bird. A pigeon, a sparrow, any bird. Their respiratory system operates on a fundamentally different architecture. Air flows through their lungs in one direction continuously, during both inhalation and exhalation. This unidirectional flow is possible because birds possess air sacs, balloon-like structures positioned before and after the lungs that act as bellows. When a bird inhales, fresh air fills the posterior air sacs. When it exhales, that fresh air flows through the lungs while the anterior air sacs simultaneously push the previous breath out. The lungs themselves, containing structures called parabronchi rather than alveoli, experience constant fresh airflow. The efficiency advantage is staggering. Birds extract oxygen with approximately 70 to 80% efficiency. Nearly all the oxygen in each breath enters their bloodstream. This allows birds to function at altitudes where mammals collapse. The bar-headed goose, Ansa indicus, migrates over the Himalayas at elevations exceeding 9,000 meters. At that altitude, atmospheric pressure drops to roughly 30% of sea level. Oxygen partial pressure is so low that most mammals would lose consciousness within minutes. Yet bar-headed geese fly through these conditions, beating their wings vigorously, sustaining the enormous metabolic demands of powered flight. As if the thin air poses no obstacle, Dr. Peter Ward of the University of Washington has spent years studying the evolutionary origins of this respiratory innovation. His research suggests that the bird respiratory system evolved not in birds, but in their dinosaurian ancestors, the archosaurs, the group including dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and crocodilians, developed air sacs and flow through breathing more than 250 million years ago. Fossil evidence from dinosaur bones shows the same pattern of pneumatic spaces that characterize modern bird skeletons. These weren't just weight reduction features. They were integral components of an advanced respiratory system. And here's why this matters for our size discussion. The sauropod dinosaurs, the largest land animals ever to exist, possessed this bird-like respiratory system. Their enormous bodies, some approaching 100 tons, required extraordinary oxygen delivery. Passive diffusion wouldn't suffice even with active circulation. But a flow-through respiratory system with 70 to 80% oxygen extraction efficiency, combined with air sacs that extended throughout their bodies, provided adequate oxygenation even for tissues deep inside massive torsos. The respiratory innovation that allows modern birds to fly over mountains enabled ancient dinosaurs to grow to sizes that mammals, breathing with mammalian lungs, could never achieve. This breathing innovation explains why the largest creatures ever to walk on Earth weren't mammals at all, and understanding their anatomy reveals the absolute upper limits of terrestrial body size. Picture a creature so immense that its footprints form ponds. Each step compresses earth and stone, creating depressions 3 feet deep and 6 feet across that fill with rainwater. After the animal pauses, the ground trembles with each footfall, a rhythmic earthquake announcing the giant's approach from hundreds of meters away. When it stops to feed, its head rises to heights where you would need a 5-story building to meet its gaze. This is Argentinosaurus, possibly the largest land animal ever to exist, and the evidence for its existence consists of fragmentary fossils discovered in Patagonia in 1987. Estimating the size of Argentinosaurus requires extrapolation from incomplete remains. Paleontologists possess a few vertebrae, some ribs, a partial femur from these fragments, comparing proportions to more complete sauropod skeletons. Researchers estimate total body length between 30 and 40 meters. Weight estimates range from 73 to 100 metric tons. The uncertainty is enormous, but even the conservative estimate makes this animal 7 times heavier than the largest modern elephants. The upper estimate reaches 100 tons, the weight of 15 to 20 adult elephants, concentrated in a single living organism. How is this possible? How does biology permit such extreme size? The answer involves multiple integrated adaptations that mammals never evolved. First, the skeleton. Sauropod bones were extensively pneumatic, meaning filled with air spaces connected to their respiratory system. A sauropod invertebrate displayed in museums shows massive bones more than 1.4 meters tall, yet approximately 75% hollow. This reduced weight dramatically while maintaining structural strength through clever architecture. Like the internal lattice of the Eiffel Tower, the bones were strong where strength was needed, and empty elsewhere. Second, the respiratory system. As discussed previously, sauropods possessed the bird-like flow-through lungs that extracted oxygen with exceptional efficiency. Air sacs extended throughout their bodies, even into their vertebrae, creating a continuous circulation of fresh air through their entire torso. This system could oxygenate tissues in the center of a 5-meter-wide body, something mammalian lungs could never accomplish. Third, the body plan. Sauropods had tiny heads relative to body size. Small heads meant small brains, minimal oxygen demand for neural tissue. Their long necks, while requiring special cardiovascular adaptations to pump blood upward, allowed them to feed across wide areas without moving their massive bodies. They could stand in one location and sweep their necks across 50 meters of vegetation. Energy efficiency approached that of stationary filter feeders. Fourth, continuous growth. Unlike mammals that reach adult size and stop growing, sauropods likely grew throughout their lives. Dr. Christian Reams of the Museum für Naturkunde in Berlin has calculated that juvenile Apatosaurus, a smaller sauropod, gained approximately 5 metric tons per year during adolescence. This continuous growth meant that individuals surviving into old age reached sizes impossible for organisms with determinate growth. And fifth, the Jurassic oxygen levels. During the age of giant sauropods, atmospheric oxygen ranged between 24 and 28%, elevated above modern levels though far below the Carboniferous peak. This modest increase in oxygen availability, combined with the respiratory innovations, provided sufficient additional oxygen delivery to support truly massive bodies. But these giants disappeared, and the question science struggles with is why. The last giant sauropods vanished 66 million years ago, when an asteroid 10 kilometers in diameter struck what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. The impact released energy equivalent to 10 billion atomic bombs. The shock wave circled Earth multiple times. Superheated debris ejected into the atmosphere rained back down, igniting global wildfires that consumed roughly 70% of the world's forests. Soot and dust blocked sunlight for months, perhaps years. Photosynthesis ceased. Plant-eating dinosaurs starved. Then the predators that depended on them followed into extinction. 75% of all species on Earth disappeared within a geologically brief period. The evidence for this catastrophe appears in rock layers worldwide. A thin band of clay enriched with iridium, an element rare on Earth's surface but common in asteroids, marks the boundary between the Cretaceous and Paleogene periods. Below this layer, dinosaur fossils appear abundantly. Above it, nothing. The extinction was geologically instantaneous. Dr. Anthony Barnowski of UC Berkeley, whose research on extinction events spans decades, notes that this represents the most rapid and complete elimination of dominant large animals in Earth's history. But the asteroid explains only the dinosaurs' extinction. What about the Pleistocene megafauna, the mammoths, ground sloths, and giant bears that vanished only 10,000 years ago? No asteroid struck Earth at the end of the last ice age. No supervolcano erupted. No obvious global catastrophe occurred. Yet approximately 80% of all genera of animals over 1,000 kilograms went extinct within a few thousand years. In North America, 34 genera of large mammals disappeared. In South America, 50 genera vanished. Australia lost its giant marsupials. Eurasia lost woolly rhinoceroses, cave bears, and Irish elk. The timing correlates suspiciously with two factors: climate change and human expansion. As the Ice Age ended, global temperatures rose by 4 to 7 degrees Celsius. Ice sheets retreated. Sea levels rose by 120 meters. Ecosystems transformed from mammoth steppe, the cold, dry grassland that covered much of the northern hemisphere, to forests, tundra, and warmer grasslands. The giant herbivores that thrived in Ice Age conditions suddenly faced shrinking habitat and changing vegetation. Simultaneously modern humans spread across the globe. Homo sapiens reached Australia roughly 65,000 years ago, and Australian megafauna began declining. Humans crossed into North America approximately 15,000 years ago, and North American megafauna collapsed shortly after. The correlation is striking, but controversial. Did humans hunt these animals to extinction? Or did we simply expand into territories where climate change had already weakened megafauna populations? Dr. Barnowski's 2004 paper in Quaternary International examined the overkill hypothesis, the idea that human hunting drove Pleistocene extinctions. The evidence is circumstantial but compelling. Kill sites show humans hunting mammoths, ground sloths, and other megafauna. Computer models demonstrate that even modest hunting pressure, killing only 1 to 2% of a population annually, could drive extinction in large, slow-breeding species over a few centuries. But proving causation remains difficult. What we do know with certainty is that being giant comes with a price, and understanding that price reveals why. Evolution doesn't simply maximize body size in every lineage. An adult African elephant consumes between 200 and 300 kilograms of vegetation every single day. That's roughly 500 to 650 pounds of leaves, bark, grass, fruit, and roots. The elephant spends 16 to 18 hours per day eating, using its trunk to select and process food in an almost continuous feeding cycle. Despite this enormous intake, elephants digest food with only approximately 40% efficiency. They excrete roughly 60% of what they consume in partially processed form. The caloric demands of maintaining a 6-ton body leave no room for inefficiency. In foraging behavior, now extrapolate to an Argentinosaurus at 80 tons. Conservative estimates suggest it would have required over 1,000 kilograms of vegetation daily, possibly much more. The animal would have done essentially nothing but eat and process food. Its entire existence revolved around fueling its massive metabolism. This represents a profound vulnerability. Any disruption in food availability, whether from climate change, fire, disease, or competition, threatens immediate survival. Large animals cannot fast for extended periods. They cannot reduce their metabolic needs significantly. They must eat constantly or die. Reproduction presents another challenge. Larger animals universally show slower reproductive rates than smaller animals. Elephants have the longest gestation period of any land mammal, 22 months. A female elephant doesn't reach sexual maturity until age 10 to 15. She produces a single calf every 4 to 6 years. Over a 60-year lifespan, a highly successful female might produce 10 calves, of which perhaps half survive to adulthood. The population growth rate is inherently slow. Compare this to a rabbit that reaches sexual maturity at 6 months, gestates for 30 days, produces 6 offspring per litter, and can have 6 litters per year. Rabbits can increase their population by orders of magnitude in a single year. Elephants cannot. This slow reproduction makes large animals exceptionally vulnerable to overhunting. Kill even a small percentage of adults annually, say 2 to 3%, and population decline becomes inevitable. The animals cannot reproduce fast enough to replace losses. Computer models of megafauna extinction consistently show that extremely modest human hunting pressure, levels that would seem sustainable to prehistoric hunters, could drive extinction within centuries. The megafauna weren't weak. They weren't poorly adapted. They simply couldn't recover from the additional mortality humans imposed. Heat dissipation creates yet another constraint. Large bodies generate heat through metabolism at a rate proportional to their volume, but dissipate heat through their surface area. The square cube law strikes again. As body size increases, surface-to-volume ratio decreases, and overheating becomes problematic. This is why elephants have large, thin ears filled with blood vessels. They flap their ears constantly in hot weather, using them as radiators to shed excess heat. It's why elephants bathe frequently and seek shade during the hottest parts of the day. A mammoth-sized animal in a hot climate would overheat and die. Despite having access to unlimited food and water, even evolution recognizes these constraints. When large mammals become isolated on islands with limited resources, they evolve smaller size within thousands of years. This phenomenon, called island dwarfism, has occurred independently dozens of times. Dwarf mammoths evolved on the Channel Islands of California, standing only 1.2 meters tall compared to 4 meters for mainland mammoths. Dwarf elephants evolved on Mediterranean islands. The evolutionary pressure towards smaller size on islands demonstrates that large size is sustainable only in environments with abundant resources. So if being giant is so costly, why did evolution create them at all? The answer reveals something profound. In the African savanna today, elephants serve as ecosystem engineers. When an elephant pushes over a tree, it creates a gap in the canopy that allows sunlight to reach the forest floor. Grasses sprout in the clearing. Grazing animals move in. The local habitat transforms from closed forest to mixed woodland and grassland. A single elephant herd can maintain vast areas of savanna that would otherwise transition to dense forest. Without elephants, much of East Africa would look entirely different. The megaherbivores don't just inhabit their ecosystem. They create it through their feeding behavior and movement patterns. This role as ecosystem engineer can only be performed by large animals. Small herbivores cannot push over mature trees. They cannot break thick branches. They cannot create the massive disturbances that reset ecological succession and maintain habitat diversity. Size becomes not a liability, but a unique advantage, allowing access to a niche that smaller animals cannot fill. This explains why evolution repeatedly produces giants, despite the costs. They're not accidents. They're solutions to specific ecological challenges. Mammoths performed a similar function in the Pleistocene. The mammoth steppe ecosystem, covering millions of square kilometers across the northern hemisphere during the Ice Age, was maintained by megafauna grazing and trampling. Dr. Sergei Zimov, a Russian scientist running the Pleistocene Park Rewilding Project in Siberia, has demonstrated that without large herbivores, this grassland ecosystem cannot persist. Trees and shrubs invade. Moss accumulates. The productive grassland that supported enormous animal populations transforms into relatively barren tundra or sparse forest. The mammoths weren't just adapted to the mammoth steppe. They were essential for its continued existence. Predator defense provides another advantage for large size. An adult elephant faces essentially no predation risk. Lions occasionally kill elephant calves, but adult elephants are invulnerable. The same was true for adult mammoths, ground sloths, and other megafauna. Growing large enough to be immune to predation represents a powerful evolutionary strategy, freeing adults from constant vigilance and allowing them to focus entirely on feeding and reproduction. The cost is slow reproduction, but the benefit is near guaranteed survival to old age for any individual reaching adult size. Large size also enables exploitation of low-quality food resources. Elephants can digest materials that would provide inadequate nutrition for smaller animals. Their massive gut volume, filled with fermenting bacteria, extracts calories from coarse vegetation like tree bark and mature grass that smaller herbivores cannot process efficiently. This allows elephants to survive in environments where smaller herbivores would starve. They occupy a distinct dietary niche defined by their size. When megafauna disappeared, these ecological roles went unfilled. The mammoth steppe collapsed. North American grasslands transformed. Ecosystems reorganized around the loss of their largest members, often resulting in reduced productivity and diversity. The cascade effects of megafauna extinction continue to shape landscapes today. 10,000 years after the last mammoths died, giants weren't evolutionary mistakes doomed to fail. They were highly successful organisms optimally adapted to specific niches. Their extinction represents not the inevitable fate of all large animals, but a historical contingency driven by unprecedented environmental changes and human impacts. And this brings us back to your body, to the question we started with. Why aren't you a giant? Your brain weighs approximately 1,400 grams, less than 2% of your total body weight. Yet at this moment, as you process these words, as your visual cortex interprets symbols and your language centers decode meaning, your brain is consuming roughly 20% of all the calories you burn at rest. That 1,400 grams of neural tissue requires approximately 350 calories per day, simply to maintain basic function. This represents the most metabolically expensive tissue in your body by far, consuming energy at a rate 20 times higher per gram than muscle tissue. Now consider what would happen if humans evolved to 9 feet tall. Maintaining the same body proportions, your brain would need to grow proportionally, though not necessarily at the same rate as your body, but supporting that brain. Pumping blood up to a head 9 feet above the ground would require tremendous cardiovascular capacity. And here's the critical trade-off. Every calorie devoted to building and maintaining a larger body is a calorie not available for your brain. Every structural adaptation that supports greater size, denser bones, thicker muscles, larger organs, increases metabolic demands. Gorillas illustrate this trade-off clearly. An adult male gorilla weighs approximately 200 kilograms, more than double a human male. Yet a gorilla brain weighs only about 500 grams, barely 1/3 the size of yours. The gorilla devoted its evolutionary investment to body size and strength. It can break bamboo stems with its hands. It can intimidate rivals through sheer physical presence. But it lacks the cognitive capacity that defines humanity. The trade-off between brain and brawn appears fundamental across primate evolution. Dr. Herman Pontzer of Duke University, whose metabolic research has revolutionized human evolution studies, has demonstrated that humans burn approximately the same total calories per day as other primates of similar size. We haven't increased our total energy budget. We've reallocated it. Less goes to digestion. Our guts are smaller than expected for our body size. Less goes to muscle maintenance. We're weaker than chimpanzees pound for pound. More goes to our brains, supporting the neural complexity that enables language, abstract thought, cumulative culture, and technology. This reallocation strategy explains why humans succeeded despite being physically unimpressive. Your ancestors, standing 165 to 175 centimeters tall and weighing 65 to 80 kilograms, were dwarfed by mammoths outsized by cave bears, outrun by virtually every predator and prey species they encountered. Yet they developed tools. They communicated complex information through language. They cooperated in sophisticated hunting strategies. They controlled fire. They constructed shelters. The cognitive advantages provided by large brains more than compensated for physical limitations. Modern height increases demonstrate that size changes result primarily from environmental rather than genetic factors. Dutch men, currently the tallest population globally, have increased average height by 20 centimeters since 1850. This dramatic change occurred in less than 10 generations, far too rapid for genetic evolution. The cause? Improved nutrition during childhood and adolescence, better protein intake, reduced infectious disease burden, stable food supplies. Dutch genes didn't change. Dutch environment did. Your genes contain the potential for a range of heights, and environment determines where in that range you actually land. So humans are optimized, not maximized. Evolution selected for the body size that balanced mobility, reproductive success, metabolic efficiency, and cognitive capacity. But there's one more twist to this story. One more way that oxygen shaped who you are. Your neurons. The specialized cells that generate thought, memory, sensation, and consciousness consume oxygen at a staggering rate. A typical neuron uses oxygen approximately 20 times faster per gram than muscle cells. This extreme metabolic demand means your brain is exquisitely sensitive to oxygen deprivation. If blood flow to your brain stops completely, if oxygen delivery ceases, you lose consciousness within 10 to 15 seconds. Brain tissue begins dying within 4 to 5 minutes. Permanent damage accumulates rapidly. No other organ system shows such immediate vulnerability to oxygen loss. This sensitivity raises a fascinating question. Did atmospheric oxygen levels influence the evolution of intelligence itself? Could brain size and cognitive capacity evolve only when oxygen availability reached sufficient levels to support energetically expensive neural tissue? Dr. David Reichel of Washington University, whose research on brain metabolism has revealed how energy-intensive neural computation truly is, has calculated that the human brain's default mode network, the neural systems active even during rest, consumes oxygen at rates near the maximum that blood flow can sustain. We know that human brain size tripled over the past 2 million years. Homo habilis, living to 0.5 million years ago, had a brain volume of roughly 600 cubic centimeters. Homo erectus reached 900 cubic centimeters 1 million years later. Homo heidelbergensis approached 1,000 to 100 cubic centimeters, and modern Homo sapiens averages 1,000 for 100 cubic centimeters. This expansion occurred during the Pleistocene epoch, when atmospheric oxygen remained stable at roughly 21%. So oxygen concentration didn't drive the size increase directly. However, the baseline oxygen level may have set the ceiling on how large brains could possibly become. In an atmosphere with only 15% oxygen, as existed during some periods of Earth's history, could a 1,400 gram brain function? The reduced oxygen partial pressure would limit oxygen delivery to neural tissue. Either brain function would degrade, or brains couldn't evolve beyond smaller sizes that lower oxygen concentrations could support. We can't test this directly, but the principle seems sound. Oxygen availability constrains metabolic possibilities, and brains represent metabolism at its most extreme. Consider stroke, the medical term for brain infarction. When a blood clot blocks an artery supplying part of your brain, the affected tissue loses oxygen immediately. Within minutes, neurons begin dying. The damage is permanent. Stroke survivors often lose function in the affected brain region permanently, unable to speak, unable to move one side of their body, unable to recognize faces or understand written language. This devastating immediate effect demonstrates how dependent consciousness itself is on continuous oxygen delivery. Your thoughts, your awareness, your sense of self all require uninterrupted oxygen flow to specialized tissue that evolved specifically to consume that oxygen at extraordinary rates. So perhaps oxygen's greatest gift to life wasn't merely enabling larger bodies. Perhaps it was enabling consciousness, the complex neural networks that allow you to ponder your own existence, to understand abstract concepts like oxygen percentage and evolutionary time, to experience wonder at giant insects that died 300 million years ago. These networks function only because Earth's atmosphere contains sufficient oxygen to fuel them. The real question isn't why you're not 9 feet tall, but why you can ask that question at all, and what that ability reveals about the universe becoming aware of itself. Science has revealed much about oxygen and body size, but vast mysteries remain. The precise oxygen levels during different geological periods are still being refined. Researchers analyze tiny bubbles trapped in amber, isotope ratios in rocks, computer models of ancient carbon cycles. Each method provides estimates with significant uncertainty ranges. Was Carboniferous oxygen really 35%? Or might it have been 30%? Or 38%? These few percentage points could dramatically change our understanding of what oxygen concentrations enable giant body sizes. The exact causes of megafauna extinction remain debated. Was it primarily human hunting, climate change, disease spread by humans or their domestic animals? Probably some combination. But the relative importance of each factor likely varied by region and species. New discoveries constantly revise our understanding. In 2021, paleontologists in Argentina discovered a new titanosaur species that potentially exceeded even Argentinosaurus in size. The specimen remains under study, but preliminary estimates suggest body mass approaching 110 tons. Each new fossil forces recalculation of size limits and evolutionary patterns. The question of why some lineages evolved gigantism while closely related lineages didn't remains puzzling. Why did sauropod dinosaurs reach 100 tons while the largest mammals topped out at 20 tons? Both groups possessed four-legged body plans, herbivorous diets, and lived in similar environments. The respiratory system difference explains part of it. But is that sufficient to explain a five-fold size difference? Or were there other factors, such as continuous growth in dinosaurs versus determinate growth in mammals, that played equally important roles? Modern research continues to surprise us. Genetic studies of extinct species reveal unexpected relationships and migrations. Denisovans were discovered only in 2010, and we're still learning about their distribution, appearance, and interactions with other human lineages. Climate science improves our reconstructions of past environments. Biomechanics research tests the physical limits of different body sizes through computer modeling. Each field contributes pieces to the puzzle. The question of how climate change might affect body size trends in the future remains open. Bergman's rule predicts that warming climates should favor smaller body sizes. Indeed, some species already show size decreases correlated with temperature increases. But other factors complicate predictions. Human-modified landscapes create novel selective pressures. Hunting and habitat loss affect large animals disproportionately. The next century might see continued loss of the remaining megafauna: elephants, rhinos, hippos, large whales. Not because their size is maladaptive in a warming world, but because humans leave insufficient space for them to exist. Yet hope persists. Rewilding projects like Pleistocene Park attempt to restore megafauna-dominated ecosystems. Conservation efforts protect remaining large animals. Our understanding of what giants need to survive improves yearly. Perhaps the story of giants isn't finished. Perhaps centuries from now, elephants will still walk the African savanna. Whales will still cross ocean basins, and humans will have learned to share the planet with the few remaining giants. We haven't yet driven to extinction. And as you drift toward sleep, consider this: your body, at this moment, carries within it the accumulated wisdom of 3.5 billion years. Every cell contains molecular machinery refined across countless generations. The hemoglobin molecules binding oxygen in your blood evolved from ancient proteins that first learned to transport that reactive gas safely. The mitochondria generating energy in your cells descended from bacteria that colonized larger cells. Nearly 2 billion years ago, the DNA coiled in your nuclei includes genes inherited from fish ancestors, mammal ancestors, primate ancestors, and even from Denisovans, a human species that vanished before recorded history began. When you breathe, when oxygen flows into your lungs and crosses into your bloodstream, you participate in a process that began when photosynthetic bacteria first split water molecules and released oxygen as waste. That waste transformed Earth. It rusted iron in the oceans, turning them red. It accumulated in the atmosphere over hundreds of millions of years. It enabled the evolution of complex multicellular life by providing the energy-rich respiration that powers animals, and it set the boundaries through physics and chemistry and biology for how large living things could grow. The giants that once walked this planet, the millipedes stretching longer than you are tall, the dragonflies with wingspans exceeding your arm span, the mammoths towering twice your height, the dinosaurs weighing more than 20 elephants. These weren't aberrations. They were life exploring the possibilities oxygen offered, testing the limits, finding ecological roles that required massive size, and sometimes, when conditions changed, failing to adapt quickly enough and vanishing into extinction. You are not a giant. Your height, typically between 150 and 190 centimeters for most adults, represents an optimization rather than a maximization. Evolution didn't push humans to the ceiling of possible size. It found the sweet spot, the balance between mobility and strength, between body maintenance and brain function, between caloric needs and available resources. You are the right size for the life you live, for the technologies you build, for the societies you create, for the thoughts you think, the oxygen you breathe. At 20.95% of every breath, sustains not just your muscles and organs, but your consciousness itself. Those neurons firing in your brain, generating the thoughts reading these words, processing memories of mammoths and millipedes and ancient forests. They exist only because oxygen delivery to brain tissue proceeds reliably every second of every day. Consciousness requires oxygen. Mind requires matter. Thought requires metabolism. And so the story continues. In you, in every human alive today, carriers of an unbroken chain stretching back nearly 4 billion years. Through fire and ice, through extinction and adaptation, through oxygen famine and oxygen abundance. The thread holds. You are the product of that journey, the inheritor of genetic innovations tested across deep time, the beneficiary of atmospheric transformations that made complex thought possible. And the story will continue, long after you're gone, into a future we can barely imagine. But our descendants will live, breathing whatever air Earth provides, adapting to whatever challenges emerge, continuing the ancient experiment of what life can become when given time and oxygen and the possibility to evolve, sleep well, and dream of giants.